Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to put a radius into a fingerboard. A properly radius fingerboard makes installing the frets easier and more accurate and leads to a more playable guitar. And with the right equipment and know-how, it's not too much of a challenge. So let's get started. You can avoid this process by using our ready-made fingerboard. We stock a range of these at Australian Luthier supplies, and they're a great option because the frets are slotted and the fingerboard is already radiused. But sometimes you want to make a fingerboard from a blank, and that's the case for me. I've got this beautiful old piece of Brazilian rosewood that I'm making a fingerboard for a tele replica that I'm building from. That's eventually going to be attached to this Queensland blackwood neck. Okay, tools. I'll run through the specialist Luthier's tools that I'll be using for this job. Firstly, I have the fingerboard radius sanding block. This has a concave in the surface which allows you to put a perfect curve in the top of the fingerboard. I'll be using the 3M Stikit sandpaper as is attached to here. The fingerboard radius gauges allow you to measure the curve in the fingerboard as you go. They have a different radius on each side of each gauge. The straight edge lets you check that the fingerboard's running straight from end to end. And finally, the Luthier's digital calipers allow you to check the thickness of the fingerboard along the edge. I've already sawn the slots for the frets. I find that sawing the slots before doing the radius is a better way to do it because cutting fret slots into a curved fretboard can be difficult. I've sanded the bottom of the fretboard flat, and I've also cut the edges parallel and square to the fret slots. It's better to keep the edges parallel rather than taper the fretboard at this stage because it'll allow you to measure the edge and check that it's even all the way along. I'm going to tape the fingerboard to this aluminium beam. That's going to keep it perfectly flat and straight as I'm working on it. You can use anything that's very straight and rigid for this backing piece. A piece of timber that's been sanded straight will also work as a substitute for the aluminium. I'll use some small pieces of double-sided tape to attach the fingerboard to the beam. I'm not using much tape as it's pretty strong and I don't want to break the fingerboard trying to prise it off at the end. I should mention about these little flaws in the piece of the timber. These are actually flaws that were in the log of rosewood when it was cut, but I found a way of positioning the fingerboard so they'll be entirely cut out once this is tapered down, so that's really lucky. I'm going to bring this down to a standard thickness of 6mm in the middle. At the moment the blank is thickness sanded to 6.5mm, so it has about a 0.5mm to come off the whole thing. I'm doing this to a 12-inch radius, so when I put that gauge on there you can see it has about another 1mm to come off the edges approximately. You could take this material off entirely by hand using a fingerboard radius sanding block. That does a good job, but it is a lot of work. Another option is to take the bulk of the material off using a hand plane or a sanding block with very coarse sandpaper. But since I have it at my disposal, I'm going to use my favourite power tool.
The big boy bench sander.
I've got the 100 grit belt on the sander. That's going to take the bulk off the fingerboard very quickly. And what I'll do is turn the sander on, then rock the fingerboard gently side to side, and that's going to put the radius into it. I'll be checking it as I go using the radius gauge, the 12-inch side of that, and using the calipers to measure the edge at each end of each side. So I'm going to measure each end of each side and just see if any of them are getting thinner than the other. So that side's pretty even. It's about 6.1 on each side. That's about 6. That's about 6. So it's actually pretty even. If you find one corner is getting thinner than the others, focus more on the thicker bits to bring it down evenly. Also, you don't want to over rock it when you're doing it, or you'll tend to round it more on the edges rather than getting a nice even radius across it. That's really close, so I'll leave it at that for the sander and move on to sanding it by hand with the fingerboard radius sanding block. I'll put some 80 grit Stikit on this sanding block. I'll sand it along the full length of the fingerboard and then check it with the straight edge as I go to make sure it's not dipping or bumping anywhere, and also checking it with a fingerboard radius gauge just for safety. Still needs a bit off the edges. It's looking better. You can just see there's still a little bit of light showing in the middle. Still needs a bit more sanding down to get the edges down to that point. So that now has the 12-inch radius all the way through, and it also runs straight to our straight edge. So we're all good. I'm going to switch down to 120 grit sandpaper and start to fine sand that now. So that's got all the scratches out from the 80 grit with the 120. Normally I'd leave it at that, fine sand it later, because it still needs the dot inlays put in it and they'll need leveling. So it would be a bit of a waste to go any finer at this stage. But because this is such a nice piece of wood and I'm kind of excited to see how it comes up, I'm going to fine sand this down to 220 and then 400 grit in the Stikit sandpaper and finish it off by polishing it with some 40 grit steel wool. So to safely get this off that double-sided tape, squeeze a steel ruler in under it and just kind of lever it off a little bit at a time. Don't put too much force on it obviously, or you might snap it. There you go, one beautiful Brazilian rosewood fretboard, ready to have the frets put in and be installed on a guitar. I hope that's helped you tackle your own fingerboard radiusing job. If it has, please hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and keep making luthier videos just like this one. I'll see you guys again soon.